Hello, everyone. My name is Jason, Legislative Chair for the San Fernando Valley Chapter of the California Rifle and Pistol Association. Primaries are past us. We have the top two candidates in all these races across Southern California, one of them being LA County Sheriff, a very important race. Look around you. The world is chaotic, things are crazy, and LA is definitely in a rough spot. So, joining me here today is candidate for LA County Sheriff and former LA County Sheriff Alex Villanueva. Alex, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Alrighty, so just jumping right into it then. For those of the in the audience out there who might not know who you are somehow, go ahead and introduce yourself and why you're running again for sheriff.
Well, as you said, I'm the 33rd Sheriff of LA County. I served from 2018 to 2022. Before that, I was a member of the Sheriff's Department for 32 years, from 1986 to 2018, the year I took office. So I spent 36 years in the organization serving LA County residents. And I can tell you, when I left office 4 years ago, it was in far better shape than we find it today. Now it's basically fallen apart totally. It's in disarray. There's a mass exodus underway. You have record suicides among department personnel, 16 to date. You have evidence of absolute incompetence and malfeasance, where in the Eaton fires, the incumbent chose not to do an evacuation plan, not to lead the charge, and just people burned to death for his failures to act when he was supposed to. And then you have, there's so many things going on with corruption and cover-ups that I don't think we have the time here today, unless you have a specific one I can tell you about. I'll just give you one simple example. We had a tragic death of three detectives from arson explosive details last year, July of last year. And there was two grenades and one went missing. Well, it turns out the missing grenade is not missing, and it wasn't missing the entire time.
Oh.
The department was concealing it, and it was improperly disposed of. It still remains a threat to the public at large. And all of this falls on the very narrow shoulders of Sheriff Luna.
Wow. Yeah, that's an insane story actually about those live grenades being mishandled like that. I mean, how do you let that happen? Um, wow, that's insane. I mean, obviously LA County's in a pretty rough spot, as you just mentioned, under Luna's leadership or lack thereof, I guess you could say. And one of those things that's really important to everybody in LA County, especially with people who are paying attention to the sheriff's race, is the Second Amendment, concealed carry permits, things like that. So before we actually jump into specifically CCWs, I'd like to get your overall thoughts on the Second Amendment. What does it mean to you?
For me, it's a foundational part of our Bill of Rights and the U.S. Constitution, right up there with the First Amendment. And I'm a firm believer in the language. Maybe today people are having a difficulty grasping it when you say a well-regulated militia, but I think what we understand of it today, and it is boils down to the individual citizen should be able to exercise the right to protect themselves. And in today's society, where so many bad things are happening, the need is there more and more. The professionals who are armed and law enforcement, they're on the run. They're shrinking in numbers. They're just simply not there. So I think residents should have the means to defend themselves. And I can think of no greater equalizer than a simple firearm.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a reason why it is called the Great Equalizer, as you were saying. A well-armed, well-disciplined populace of people that can defend themselves, their families, their communities at large. It's an integral part of American history and American society. Yeah, absolutely. And for the responsible gun owners out there who want to take it to the next step to get their CCW permit here in LA County, obviously the sheriff plays a integral role in that processing and things like that. There's a lot of chatter online, and a lot of people are very confused about CCWs right now. It's taken a very long time to get your CCW in LA County, and it's caused a lot of anguish for LA County residents. So The next question then would be, what is your plan for CCWs? Under your previous administration in 2022, I understand that CCW numbers increased dramatically after the Bruin decision came out. So, assuming you get a second term, what can you do to help with the CCW process in LA County?
Well, I can tell you this, our numbers rose dramatically even before the Bruin decision. When we took office, we increased the amount of personnel that were doing the background investigations on CCW applicants and greatly. We went from 2 to 11. We added supervisors, we added some civilian staff, and we tried to make it. My goal was to make the good cause standard achievable, not impossible. Because the way it was being practiced in LA County was, unless you were a retired judge or some political ally of the sheriff, it was just simply not available. And to that extent, my predecessor, Jim McDonald, I think he issued 194 CCWs his entire time in office. His predecessor, Baca, 4 terms in office, he only issued maybe 200, if that, in his
Wow.
time in office. And he was caught selling CCWs for campaign contributions to boot. So my
Jeez.
goal is to make it achievable. And with that, we knew that every resident, no matter where you lived, if you lived in a city that had its own police department, you went there first and they rejected it. Then you went to the sheriff. It's like the appellate level for a CCW. So I figured, you know what, let's just stop people having forcing them to go through 2 application process. Let's just make it one. We'll do the entire county. Word got out, and I got to hand it to you guys. You guys are wired, because as soon as the word on the yard was that we were taking CCW applications, we were inundated with them. We're talking crates of them every single day came in. And we ended up issuing 4,600 CCW permits in the span of 4 years, which is about, we'll do the math, 200. What do you get to 4,600? That's,
It's a, it's
we
a
more
good
than
chunk.
I think 20-fold increase, or almost 100-fold increase. Actually, more than 100-fold, 200-fold increase of CCW permits. And then along came the Bruin decision. And that was actually beneficial to us because, one, it made it easier to do the applications because you didn't have to go through the good cause standard.
Mhm.
And now local police departments, local jurisdiction couldn't deny them outright.
Right.
Now they had to honor CCW permits. So instead of having a potential 10 million pool, now our pool is shrunk to 3 million. And this is where, obviously, now where the personnel issue and the hiring freeze imposed by the Board of Supervisors, now they started limiting our personnel that were available. So the wait time increased. We were cranking them out in a month at the beginning. It climbed up to almost 10 months, 11 months at the peak of all this. And then when I left office, my successor decided to slow walk CCWs. And he got sued by your organization, the CRPA.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe you guys settled out of court or something.
It's a tentative settlement at the
And,
moment.
and trust me, he has no interest in honoring it. So don't be fooled. He's being sued by the federal DOJ on the same grounds, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot going right now, not going on that's not good at all. And the Board of Supervisors, not to be outdone, when the Bruin decision came about, they told me, "Oh, you need to suspend your CCW program while we review, the impact." And we told them politely, "It's not your business; it's ours, and we're going to continue."
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you mentioned exactly there. We sued LA County sheriffs for the CCW violations under state law and the ridiculous time frame. Right now, of course, state law, you have to process them within 120 days, and the current administration has not been doing that. To add to that, with the tentative settlement from our organization and the sheriff's department currently, right now, on LA County Sheriff's website, there's a chart on the CCW numbers for 2026 so far. And what it says is 5,308 permits issued. Now, this does count renewals. Renewals are factored into this particular number, and there are 4,354 applications received, including modifications to CCWs. I just want to get your reaction to those numbers, and if you think those are, based in any kind of reality, or do you think the majority of those numbers are renewals rather than the initial CCWs? What do you have to say about that?
I suspect those numbers of 5,300 are based on renewals, not on new applications. And in fact, let me quote you from the federal DOJ. Let me see. And I'm quoting the Department of Justice. The scope of this constitutional violation is staggering. Between January 2024 and March of 2025, defendants received 3,982 applications for a new concealed carry license. Of these, they approved exactly 2.
Yes.
Holy shit. There's no other way to sugarcoat that.
Yeah.
So based on that, and all of a sudden now they came up with these numbers. One, they're bullshit numbers. I'm pretty sure most of them are just renewals of what we already had. 2, they have a massive staffing crisis where they don't have the personnel anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So unless they resuscitated Wyatt Earp and all his family to start handling these things, it ain't happening. So they're just figuring, well, we'll just lie to you, and we'll lie to the reporters, and what's the penalty if we get caught? There's no penalty because they're not saying any of this under oath.
With the staffing issues currently in LA County Sheriff's, the CCW unit, as from what I understand, is basically on loan deputies that have to come in and do all the processing at the moment. There is a CCW process and a way to do it, but it's not a dedicated task force. So with those staffing issues, what would your thoughts be on creating maybe that more dedicated task force for CCWs and maybe integrating that for your plan? I've noticed in some other interviews and places you've said your goal is to hire 2,000 deputies within 2 years. So does that factor into helping out with the CCW process as well?
Most definitely. We're going to set aside at least a good 10 background investigators to work specifically on CCWs. Because we're triaging the patient as we speak right now. So we got to see where the greatest need is, and obviously getting deputies working, answering 911 calls is number one. But a close second to that is also making sure we have the ability to empower citizens to protect themselves, because we're just simply not available to the degree we were in the past under my administration. So you can see, if I get 2,000, the first 300 or 400, I'm going to separate a good 10 straight to the CCW unit.
Yeah, that's good to hear. It's definitely long overdue, that's for sure. And, you mentioned the federal lawsuit with the Trump Department of Justice suing LA County sheriffs over the CCW violations. And yeah, that 2 number is egregious. That should never happen between January 24 and March of 25. That is ridiculous. I do want to mention a quote from Sheriff Luna. There was a NBC report on the federal lawsuit. Sheriff Luna said that he, quote, inherited a dysfunctional system with CCWs in this report. I just want to get your reaction to that.
Well, I want to keep this G-rated, my response to that, for public consumption. But I'll tell you this, the man has no shame whatsoever. He flat out lies with like a psychopath. Doesn't even bat an eye when the exact opposite is true. Just like he's claiming that recruitment was in crisis or staffing was in crisis, doesn't mention the fact that the people that recruited him, the board of supervisors, froze our ability to hire and then defunded us by over $250 million. Yeah, that puts a big wrinkle in our ability to hire or block from hiring. Doesn't ever mention that. And so then, it's just the dishonesty is mind boggling. But that statement you just gave me there, it just really gives you a small sample of what Luna is. Sociopath that will say anything to get ahead, doesn't care about reality.
a lot of politicking, as it were. It's with all the issues going on in LA County sheriffs, they should be looking inward, looking inward and to really identify the problems coming from within. But I just thought that was a really interesting quote because, looking at the numbers, looking at the disparity between what is claimed and then what actually has happened and the federal Department of Justice stepping in the first place, something's really not adding up there. So,
Well, I'll tell you
yeah.
this. I read an article while I'm doing this research. I read an article that the Times wrote back in 25, I think. Uh, and they talk about the staffing crisis. They go through 3, 4 pages of, oh my God, this, oh my God, that. They never ever mention the hiring freeze imposed by the Board of Supervisors.
Hmm.
And they were painting it like, oh, I was incapable of hiring anybody in 2021. We only hired 81 people. Oh, gee, you think it's because you guys blocked my ability to hire or because people didn't want to be deputy sheriffs? We hired 1,100 deputies in 2019. So we went from 1,100 to 81. And there's the start of the staffing crisis right there, the impact of the hiring freeze.
The,
And
the the
there's so
defund the police crowd.
part of that whole movement of defund the police. It was another way to defund the police. Just don't let them hire. So as people retire, they just shrink. And that was their specific goal.
Yeah, and we'll definitely be touching more on the staffing issues a little bit later on. But I wanted to start off with the Second Amendment and those types of questions first. So, one thing that people have criticized you for during your first administration was during the pandemic and what happened with the gun stores in LA County. People have often said you flip-flopped a lot when it came to opening the gun stores, close the gun stores. They're essential, they're non-essential, things like that. And this all really happened in this really brief period of time of about a week. What is your reaction to the critics out there who might not be as happy with maybe how you handled the gun store situation during COVID? And, a lot of people will say that because of some federal pressure and the lawsuits being kind of forced your way, that was the only reason why you opened up the stores. That's what these critics have been saying. What is your reaction to that? And how can people, let's say another pandemic happens and things need to close, how can people be confident in your ability to help the gun stores stay essential businesses within the county?
Well, let's start by the obvious. The last pandemic was 1918. The only person who was alive in that time, I think, was my grandfather's. All right. So there was no playbook of how to handle a pandemic. At the onset of the pandemic, they closed everything. Absolutely everything got shut down. If you remember that first week or so,
Oh, yeah.
nothing was open. And then the federal government and the Board of Supervisors that came up with, well, what's essential, what's not essential. So we're thinking, okay, gas, food, okay, that's about it. And so I went along. I didn't have anything else to compare with or, any prior experience to know what to do in this. And I heard a lot as soon as, I mean, heck, they went as far as open, they declared that, was it strip clubs or something were considered essential?
I think I vaguely remember something
Some
like that.
bizarre
Yeah.
thing like that. And I realized probably about 2 weeks in, I realized, this whole thing about essential and not essential is hogwash. Every every job, every business is essential because one, it puts food on the table for somebody. And by shutting things down arbitrarily, you're really screwing people over. And I think in LA County, there was tens of thousands of mom and pop businesses that were destroyed. Closing a gun store, on the bright side, there's nothing that's disposable that you're going to lose. But closing a grocery store, you're losing thousands and thousands of dollars of inventory of food that goes bad. Okay. So the decision we made when we got the feedback that we can't, that it's essential, I went along with it. I didn't have a dog in the fight per se because we had nothing else to compare it to. And I think once we got it all figured out, probably about 2 weeks into it, maybe even less, we figured, okay, no, let's keep all the businesses open. In fact, we didn't enforce a closure of anything. once we realized it. Now the Board of Supervisors and Dr. Ferrer, remember the one from the Department of Public Health?
Mm-hmm.
They were all about, picking winners and losers. And somehow the big box stores could stay open. The mom and top grocery stores had to close. See, that's bullshit right there. They were picking winners and losers based on their politics. And that really screwed over a lot of people. I would say probably over 10,000 businesses failed strictly on decisions of the Board of Supervisors. And I want to take no part in that whatsoever. Once we figured out what was happening, we said, no, we're not involved. We didn't enforce mask mandates anywhere. We had George Gascon as a district attorney. We couldn't get him to actually prosecute felonies and all misdemeanors, and even a few felonies he wouldn't prosecute. You think he was going to prosecute infractions for a mask? So that is a very ugly chapter in of COVID history. And too bad. I wish I had more information at the onset than that we know now. We probably could have kept everything open from the very beginning. But it is what it is. If someone has a heartache over that, they need to wake up.
Well, the thing is too with a lot of these gun stores tend to be mom and pop shops, so they were hit the hardest by a lot of this stuff. And the idea about gun stores not being essential, I think, is a preposterous idea, because it's the means to acquire arms to defend yourselves and your families, especially during a time of turmoil like a pandemic where everything's going awry and everything is crazy. So I think you do definitely lose a lot when you close a gun store or you close a any kind of outdoors spot like that. I think they're just as essential as a grocery store. So it's just something that I wanted to ask you about, because I've seen some people be a little skeptical about what your position might actually be on gun stores, if you wanted them to be essential or not, or what your thoughts on that were.
Well, my thought is I think every business is essential. Anything that employs someone and they're making a living is by definition essential.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think an external third party should be deciding what's essential or what's not, because they don't have skin in the game. They're not closing their line of work. See how convenient it was for the Board of Supervisors to say, oh, we're going to close open air eating places. Remember all the money that restaurants spent putting tents and tables outdoors and all that? And then they said, oh, we're going to close that. Holy shit, you just forced them to dump, so much money that they didn't have to do something, and then you're going to block them from doing it. Oh my God, that was rubbing salt in the wound. And then you have a supervisor going to Il Fornau to have dinner the very same day she cast the vote to pass the ban on outdoor dining. I mean, that is just horrible. So my
Yeah.
position is every store is essential, including gun stores. And we can go into the finer details. And you have a good point there about when you're facing anarchy, social turmoil, civil unrest, and all that. Well, you got to give people a chance to defend themselves. Although I have a suspicion that if everything broke out immediately, I think most of our CCW permittees and gun owners are in pretty good shape right now versus the people that'll be scrambling to get them.
I would say so, yeah, and there will be a dramatic increase of the number of new gun owners for sure. I mean, we saw that during the pandemic, and there were,
Very
I
true.
mean, insane lines around the blocks for many, many, many people, countless people every week. So yeah, it's so important to stay armed and to stay vigilant, and have that in your safe, so to speak, there. And now, one other thing I wanted to mention as well is, with the Second Amendment, and, not just with CCWs and handguns, but, the Second Amendment protects all types of arms, whether it's, handguns, rifles, shotguns, things like that. I wanted to ask you a question about some comments you had previously made in an interview a few years ago while you were sheriff. During an interview with the Los Angeles Airport Peace Officers Association, you were asked that if you could enact one law, what would it be? And your comments were that you would ban the sale and manufacture of semi-automatic rifles that take detachable magazines, and you labeled them as weapons of war. Do you still share those sentiments, and what is your reaction to what you said a few years ago? Because a lot of gun owners might look at that and go, what the heck? Why is a sheriff saying something like this when, the sheriff can influence the board of supervisors maybe to tighten the assault weapons restrictions countywide, or, in case you decide to go somewhere else and have other political aspirations, how, people might be a little weary about that, especially gun owners. So what is your response to that?
Well, that's a good question, and I think from my viewpoint as a chief law enforcement officer in the county, we deal with a lot of tragedies involving guns. We're looking at the mass shootings, the ones that involve AR-15s, AK-47s, or whatever the case may be. And there's an argument to be made there. However, I think the way the political landscape is shaping up these days, it's either all or none. This fine line of splitting hairs in between is probably not gonna work in the long term, because it's the nose, the camel's nose in the tent. If you ban one thing, they're gonna ban something else, and they're gonna keep going that route. And look at how many governors and how many states have been trying to sign into law, like the ban on Glocks, for example, most
Right.
recently. And that's a friggin' it's a handgun, and they
Mhm.
found a way to make that somehow illegal. And that one I know is being challenged in court, and I think it was suspended, right? Pending the
Well,
outcome.
there was a temporary restraining order filed, but the district judge denied that. So, litigation will move forward. The ban will stay in place while it continues to be litigated.
Mhm. Okay. That unfortunately we export a lot of weapons to the rest of the world, and I mean a lot. And if you look at in Mexico, south of the border, the money, the weapons go south, the drugs go north. And we play a role in that. I think we can't look past that fact. So I've had my doubts about the wisdom of manufacturing, you know, AR-15s that could be converted into M16s, 50 cals, um, things like that. And I think M60s. I mean, I come from the military, so I'm used to everything that's automatic. But I got to switch to the civilian world, and things are semi-automatic, or supposed to be. And I think now I think my position has evolved in that regard, because I think it's not the issue about the type of weapon; it's the restrictions placed on it. Because the only people that comply with regulations are honest, law-abiding citizens. The crooks don't care.
Right.
They're going to take any weapon and modify it to make it fully auto, for
Right.
example. We know that already. So it's kind of useless. Almost every one of these things, outside of manufacturing 50 cals and M60s deliberately, it's kind of useless to put restrictions on every other type of semi-automatic rifle. So I'd say let's leave it alone. Let's focus on enforcing the laws that are on the book. And look what Gascon did when he was in office. He refused to add charge crooks that were caught with firearms. Well, we've been fighting all along.
The,
So
the people who actually shouldn't have firearms, that are
yes.
felons and violent and dangerous to themselves and others. I do want to quickly go back to your comment about weapons going south of the border, and how we play a role in that, as you were saying. The Supreme Court last year, in a case where Mexico was suing American gun manufacturers, trying to blame them for cartel violence, saying that, hey, Smith and Wesson and Ruger and all these companies, because they just manufacture guns and they somehow end up in Mexico to the cartels, and that should just be automatically their fault for making the weapons in the first place. And the Supreme Court actually unanimously ruled that Mexico's lawsuit doesn't work, because just because you have manufacturers of these firearms that are legally made, legally sold in the United States, and then people criminally use them elsewhere, that doesn't necessarily mean the firearms manufacturer should be held liable, or just because the mere presence of those guns mean the cartel is more likely to commit acts of violence. There's actually Justice Kagan who wrote that opinion, saying with the federal law that an actual willful violation needed to be enacted saying, yes, this company is going to make guns specifically for the cartel. But we all know that's not happening. These gun manufacturers are going by the books. They are doing everything legally. So I just want to get your thoughts on that lawsuit, because you were talking about America's role, you were saying, in weapons going down south, and the apprehensions that you've had about the manufacture of some of these guns. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, you know what? You got to think about it this way. In the sheriff's department alone, when we're fully staffed and everyone has no restrictions in actually enforcing the law and being proactive, we confiscate about 5,000 firearms a year. 5,000.
I believe it.
And every year they do a mass shredding. We convert it into rebar. We have a hydraulic press at the Central Supply and Logistics, and the mass press is used to render safe every firearm. It gets crushed where you can't use it anymore, and then from there it goes to a metal recycler and they shred it, and it becomes rebar. And the provocative question is, how many firearms do people need that can be manufactured, and how many are we supplying to people that ultimately they're going to be taken off the streets? They fall into bad hands, and this is a it's a difficult question. How do you do that? And we can't blame the manufacturer for making it. Do we blame irresponsible gun owners for somehow, or straw purchasers that are knowingly buying this for the intent to pass it on to a gangster? I mean, there's a lot of issues at stake there when we trace how a firearm is manufactured legally, goes to legal hands, falls into legal hands, and from there goes on to being used in an act of violence. And I don't think we can turn a blind eye to that. We have to find a way to somehow keep them off the hands of people that should not have them, but not restrict the access to those who should legally be able to purchase them.
Yeah. So then, following up on that, earlier this year with the White House Correspondents' Dinner shooter, who they received their firearms from a Turner's Outdoorsman location. Turner's did everything right, with DOJ oversight, California DOJ oversight. The person filled out their 4473. They did all the proper legal steps to get a firearm. This is nothing to do with the store doing anything wrong, or even the California DOJ doing anything wrong. They cleared this individual. But you still have people like Supervisor Hahn on the Board of Supervisors saying, let's investigate Turner's Outdoorsman for aiding in criminal activity, calling on District Attorney Hockman to open an investigation on a lawful business like Turner's, trying to somehow blame them for a heinous act of violence. So
But
I
I gotta
think,
pause. I gotta pause right there.
yeah.
The chutzpah of Supervisor Han is something else. So she's complaining about an enterprise and wants an enterprise investigated for engaging in lawful activity. Yet when I was sheriff, and we opened an investigation based on a criminal complaint of one of her peer supervisors for engaging in unlawful activity, she lost her mind.
Hmm.
You got to just admire the sheer hypocrisy of that. But keep going.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. I mean, the so bottom line is, though, the basic idea that somehow Turner's Outdoorsman is should be held responsible for the White House Correspondents' Dinner shooter is ridiculous to me, and it's based off of this lie of gun trace data. And I want to get your thoughts on gun trace data, because oftentimes, or most of the time actually, it just traces it back to the gun store or the lawful person who purchased the firearm. And most of these guns that are used in crimes happen to be stolen anyways. So what are your thoughts on gun trace data, and people trying to use this as a way to say, hey, if we trace this back to the gun stores and we tally how many of these guns originate from a particular store, a particular business, we should hold them accountable. Right now we have Assembly Bill 1810 going through the legislature that would do just that, create a top 10 list of worst gun stores in the state with all these firearms that are traced back to them that have been used in crime, or even suspected to have been used in a crime. Didn't even have to be, just suspected to be. So, as a sheriff, what are your thoughts specifically then on gun trace data?
Well, I think, and I think you made the point yourself. Like Turner's has no control over a person lawfully possessing a firearm that they purchased it from Turner, but then they're the subject of a burglary, and then that burglar sells that gun to someone else on the cheap, and that person uses it as a Saturday night special to kill somebody or rob a store, whatever the case may be. Yeah, that doesn't fall on Turner, doesn't fall on the lawful gun owner. I think the only thing I ask gun owners are is to be responsible. Do not leave your firearms where they can be accessible by people who should not possess them. That's the obviously children, the mentally ill, the suicidal crowd, the ones that are subject of restraint orders, for example. Okay, keep it out of their hands. Keep it locked and safe. You're good to go. And I think that's the standard we should follow. But what Sacramento is doing is ludicrous, just as ludicrous as forcing people to get renew their license every 2 years. I hear they updated now to 3 years. Is that true?
That's right. Yeah, AB 1948 was signed into law about a month ago now by Governor Newsom. So, starting January 1st next year, CCWs will be 3 years.
It should be 6 years at a minimum. I mean, two was ridiculous. Three is not so ridiculous as two, but still kind of ridiculous. Do circumstances change so much in someone's life in the span of 3 years that they got to do it all over again? No. And that's just another way of Sacramento is trying to eat away at Second Amendment rights. I mean, how many other of these stupid laws do they put out there?
Yeah, it's always an onslaught of all these bills every single year. I mean, with the legislative year coming to a close, there's only a few more opportunities to kill some of these really bad bills. But yeah, you know as well as I do that it's a constant uphill battle with trying to defend the Second Amendment in California. So I appreciate your comments on that and everything we talked about because it's super important, I think, to talk about guns that are in common use and are the go-to for all types of lawful activities in the United States. And so with the AR question, the semi-automatic rifle question, I wanted to get to the core of how you thought about that because, there's so many people, there's so many legal gun owners, so many people who have AR-15s that might be a little weary about those particular comments. And, the Supreme Court is going to be taking assault weapons ban cases in the next term. So hopefully that settles everything about a year from now.
I'm an owner of one myself. So I got it way back when the first ban was enacted back in the I think late 80s, early 90s. Remember?
The federal ban or California's first initial one? Because California, we had ours in 1989, and then the federal assault weapons ban under Clinton was 94. So around there.
Yeah, we're around that time frame, and the guy who sold to me wanted to buy back to me just a few months later for you know 3 times the amount that I paid for it. I said no, I'm keeping it, and so still have it to this day, and I got no problem with that.
Okay, so just to put a bow on that, then you would say your viewpoint has changed since your interview in 2021 on that issue. Then
Yeah, that's a safe way to look at it. I mean, circumstances are changing throughout the world, and part of the job of being sheriff is you're constantly weighing risk. And classic example is with ICE when the Biden administration allowed 10 million plus people just swarm the border unvetted. That totally changed the calculus of risk for interactions of local law enforcement with ICE, and that is something we have to take into consideration. It's a dynamic world. It's not a static world. And when crime is up, people have no respect for law enforcement. We got to do our best to arm people so they can defend themselves and make sure that deputies themselves can defend themselves because Lord knows sometimes they're outgunned.
it's a crazy world out there, and yeah, the flooding of illegal immigrants for unvetted. under Biden was is a huge travesty for this country. That's for sure. And you mentioned defending yourself and uh, how important that is. What are your thoughts then on stand your ground laws? Currently California only really recognizes stand your ground in case law. We do have castle doctrine in California. You actually had lawmakers last year try to get rid of castle doctrine with Assembly Bill 1333. That was an absurd bill. I'm glad we got that defeated for now. But um, as a sheriff, what are your thoughts on stand your ground? There were some comments made a few years ago by a sheriff from Florida saying if somebody breaks into your house, you're more than welcome to shoot them, and you save time and resources from sheriff's departments. And he invited people to train with the sheriff's department to be more proficient with firearms. So,
Is that my
what are your
friend Jeff
thoughts on
Grady?
that? What's that?
Was that my friend Jeff Grady?
That was. Oh, I don't have his name written down. I just did it was the Santa Rosa County Sheriff from a few years ago. I don't recall his name.
All right. Well, I'll tell you this. I'm a firm believer in stand your ground. That 1333, I remember reading it last year, absolutely horrendous. I don't believe anyone in their own home should have the duty to retreat. No. And empower crooks to think they have the upper hand. No. And I take it a step further. I think if you're involved in a criminal act, you should have no standing to sue your victims. Like when a crook robs a store and then someone tackles him or he gets shot in the process of robbing the store, he should not have the right to sue the store. I think you forfeit all your rights when you engage in criminal activity. But the way the law is written in California, or the way case law has been practiced in California, a lot of crooks feel they have the license to operate with impunity in commercial areas.
Yeah, soft on crime policies are they kill people. I mean, it's a pretty bleak statement, but they really do. And you hear all the time about how crime is down in LA County. Well, yeah, that's what happens when people stop reporting things and because they know nothing's going to happen to these people. So it's it's really a double-edged sword for people. Damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of a situation for honest law-abiding people. Furthermore on that, with Senate Bill 2 and all the restrictions that put in place with all the sensitive places in California, at the time in 2024, you had Sutter County Sheriff Brandon Barnes saying, quote, "We have no interest in criminalizing constitutionally protected behavior." So as far as enforcement of SB2 and how stringent you may or may not be if you get a second term, what do you have to say about the sensitive places restrictions under SB2, and how does your administration react to that?
Well, to anyone who wants us to enforce SB2, and you gotta forgive me here, we have two different versions of SB2 going on. We have that one about firearms and sensitive location. We also have the one about police records and decertification of law enforcement. And unfortunately, it has the same title, SB2.
I see.
But that your version of SB2, I'd say, you know what? When the politician is successful in ridding all these places of criminals with evil intent, let me know. Yeah, until that point, don't bother me with that.
Gotcha. So, safe to say SB2 is not even a real concern about, what you might think a sensitive place might be or not.
No.
I see. So, obviously with people having to defend themselves, we just talked about it a few minutes ago with ICE. Illegals and hardened criminals are coming over the border, and it puts people in situations they otherwise really wouldn't find themselves in if these people weren't let in the first place. Now, with Senate Bill 54 and California's sanctuary laws, I wanted to get your thoughts on Senate Bill 54. And other people have again been maybe sort of critical, saying that you physically removed ICE from the jails in 2019, and a lot of people are not happy about that. And that was part of the campaign promises when you were running originally. So comparing that to now, what do you have to say about Senate Bill 54, and what are your thoughts on how integration with ICE is being handled right now?
SB 54 needs to be rewritten. The open border policy of the Biden administration kind of made it move, because now, again, this is about the calculation of risk. We do know from practical experience going all the way back to the 1970s, this is when Daryl Gates was the chief of LAPD. He recognized that law enforcement has to work within immigrant communities. You know, you got to convince people to call 911. There's a crime happening and report crime. If local law enforcement is working hand in hand enforcing federal immigration law, well, then they're simply not going to call, even when the worst things are happening, because that's tantamount to getting deported. And this is something that some hardliners were just refuse to admit. And they say, well, we don't care. They don't belong here anyway. Well, you can't do that. As sheriff of LA County, you're sheriff for all 10 million residents, the 9 million that are here legally and the 1 million that are here illegally. You have to ensure that everyone's is provided a modicum of public safety. Having said that, the moment where the two paths do cross and they need to cross is when you have someone in jail, a local charge who was also subject to an ICE detainer. And this is the part that you may not be familiar with, and most people aren't. Prior to me being sheriff, the sheriff's department in the county was sued. It was a class action lawsuit, Gonzalez versus County of LA. And it involved people being detained at the county jail based on an ICE detainer and nothing else. And during my time in office, we lost that lawsuit. It went to trial and we lost our ass because, and this is a federal lawsuit, and the ruling was pretty simple. The US Constitution says you can only detain based on probable cause. There's no wording in there that says, well, with a nice administrative detainer, you can detain them too. That's not in the US Constitution. Of course, the hardliner constitutionalists, well, that one got served back on them, because now we can keep people in custody on local charges, but when the local charges expire, the ICE detainer does not keep them legally in custody. They have to be released. And so when I was in office, prior to me taking office, the county jail had devolved into an immigration detention center, which was contrary to policy and contrary to actually not to case law based on this lawsuit. But we never wanted to stop ICE from doing their job. They have a very important job to do, and we need them to do their job. So how do we work together? SB 54 was a compromise, but as we said, SB 54 now is kind of irrelevant after what Biden did with open borders. It needs to be redone. So any agency wants to pick up a body in the county jail, they have to have an arrest warrant to take them from our custody to their custody. ICE can also get arrest warrants and go take their bodies from the county jail. And we treated them that way. And we always did. So ICE never lose the ability to take someone with an arrest warrant from the county jail. We also allow them to take bodies based on SB 54. There was about 131 categories, felonies, and a few misdemeanors. And we transfer those bodies to ICE pursuant to SB 54. Now, the problem with now that we've changed the 10 million plus that are unvetted there in the county, we have no idea who these people are. And there's the people on the far left that are saying you can't cooperate with ICE whatsoever. But you know what? There's a fine line between not cooperating and obstructing federal immigration enforcement. And that fine line, people don't understand it or appreciate it. I think, one, we should make public everybody who's in the county jail. No should be there in a mystery. And if ICE identifies someone in the county jail, we'll tell them their release date is this. That's the expiration of local charges. If you want your body, pick them up by this date. If not, they're going to be kicked free. And otherwise, it would constitute an over detention. We'll be sued for over detaining the individual. And that's what happened with our lawsuit. I think that works both ways. In that degree of cooperation where we're just coordinating, hey, local charges expire, get your body or he's free, that's up to you. Put the onus back on ICE. Well, then there. Or they can, to paraphrase Sheila Kuehl, they can put on their big boy pants and go get an arrest warrant in court like every other law enforcement agency does, and they can have their body whenever they want them. We'll even hold them with a federal arrest warrant, like we do for the FBI, Secret Service, ATF, DEA, and all the other three-letter agencies. We do that all the time. ICE should be no different.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, then it's more of the, if an illegal is detained by the county, um, something happens. Here's your release date. ICE, come get them, or else they're just going to be walking basically. And then you just kind of shove it over to ICE, and you guys kind of try to stay separate in that instance, but still kind of have that degree of communication. Or am I
Well,
missing the point?
no, there has to be a certain degree of cooperation between the two entities. What we don't want to do is physically spend our resources doing federal immigration enforcement. You're not going to see us on raids with ICE, raiding factories and stuff like that, or chasing farm workers through strawberry fields. That's ICE's job. And they don't do a very good job at that because they haven't been trained well recently, probably over the last 2 years. And that's something that I think people agree that ICE needs to do their job better, because there's agreement from both parties that there was 640,000 odd criminal aliens in the United States. Getting those people, I think there was a consensus that everyone was okay with that. But when ICE began deviating, they began chasing quotas and collateral arrests. Then they started losing public support. And that's where all the images of them raiding car washes and things like that, going after numbers. And people were saying, hey, what happened to the criminal aliens you said you were going to get? And from a executive in one of the largest law enforcement agencies in the nation, you have a defined capacity to arrest, detain, prosecute people. If you're wasting that defined capacity on abuelita who dropped off the kids at school, or the guy working the car wash, and you didn't get the Tren de Aragua gangster, well, you're not helping anybody in that, because you're wasting capacity on those who do not pose a threat. You should spend your capacity on what poses a threat. This is a 30,000 view that Stephen Miller, from who's been advising Trump, doesn't get.
So not a big fan of Stephen Miller and what his policies have been on ICE.
I think he screwed Trump over royally, because Trump winning in 24, he had such a major inroad for the GOP in the Latino community. And he literally pissed all of that away in the span of the first 2 months that he took office.
And you think that's because of the ICE raids?
The way they did their business, and I've spoken to ICE agents themselves that say, hey, those new ones that are out there, they're not trained properly. They're not going through 6 months of training up in Virginia and Quantico and learning and then working their way into the field. No, they're getting 6 to 8 weeks of cranking them out and just tell them, go get them, however you do it, because they're looking for numbers, quotas. And that huge disservice to Trump and the GOP.
What would your response be to the people who, setting aside, let's say, quota numbers, the people who are illegal, that are working at, you saying, the car washes or anything like that, that maybe they're not associated with Tren de Aragua or any of these other gangs, and people, I think you alluded to this a little bit earlier, you're saying, oh, well, they shouldn't be here anyways. Well, yeah, I mean, they shouldn't be here anyways, and those jobs could be for American people. That could be, get rid of the people who are all here illegally, and despite if there's any kind of quota or there's anything like that, you can still get rid of people who are still breaking the law by being here illegally, and try to get that going. So what's your response to those people there then that would maybe push back, saying, well, yeah, they were here illegally, so why should they not be included along with all the other raids? Like, why not raid the car washes and Tren de Aragua at the same time? Especially, I understand you were criticizing ICE for not having the proper training for some of their agents, but if the recruitment numbers are going up for ICE and trying to spread the resources out that way, I just want to get your thoughts on that then.
Well, I'll tell you there's two things. One is the people saying, well, they don't belong here anyway, they are not going to do that job. Who are they kidding? They're not going to work the car wash. They're not going to pick the strawberries in the field. They're not going to be wiping butts in the, the senior center. They're not going to do any of that. They want someone else to do that job. And this is supply and demand. There are not enough Americans that are willing to do these jobs, period. And that's why these people fill the void. Okay. But on the other hand, we're not Germany in 1930s. We're not going to round up all the brown skinned folks and put them in boxcars and just say go south and kick them out once you cross the border. That's not going to happen. We inherited about 10 to 12 million undocumented over the course of the last 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, you got people here that are undocumented, been here for 3 decades, own homes and businesses and all this stuff, pay taxes. Do we need to fix the immigration system? Yes. Do we need to have them get in the back of the line and not cut in front of the line, which is what happened under Biden? Oh, hell yes. Imagine that. Someone who's been waiting patiently to do things legally for 20 years and some jackass just jumps the border. And then you have people that want to give them a paid hotel room and a debit card and all this other crap. That's a sick joke. All right. We need to establish firm rules and guidelines for proper naturalization process where you pay your taxes, pay your dues, and you don't jump the line. You're going to wait your turn like everybody else. So we need to legalize the system. We need to right size our immigration system to fit the labor demand, the labor market. And I think there's a movie they made about that, A Day Without Mexicans. You may have heard of it.
No, I haven't actually.
Well, basically, the gist of the movie is a shock if we removed all undocumented people from the workforce at once. What would it look like? Pretty much a lot of things would collapse.
Well, I guess that's, I don't know if that's a fair analysis or a comparison to say that it's, we're going to be like Nazi Germany or anything, putting people in boxcars and brown bodies and throwing them over the border. I mean, that I don't know if that's a accurate representation of what's going on, but I think where a lot of people are very concerned about it too is even the people who are, again, not associated with a cartel, so to speak, or any kind of gang or something like that, that they get all these benefits. They get these handouts, they get these cards, and they get all this free health care. And California wants to subsidize all that, and they want to
They
put
should
all
get.
these,
They
yeah.
shouldn't get any of that.
Right. So
I'm not,
so then the argument there with them would be, okay, these people should leave the country anyways because these resources that otherwise would be going to regular American people are being handed out for free on, you know, taxpayers' dollars for illegal immigrants that, they cut. They did all of that. So I think that's where a lot of this stems from, where a lot of people are very upset that, oh yeah, the person who works the car wash or anybody like that, yeah, they get all these handouts, they get this food stamps, and they get the health care and all that stuff. It feels like a betrayal from your own government taking care of somebody else that was illegal, and you've had a family here who's been here for generations.
and then they're 100% correct, and I'm in 100% agreement with them. They should not be getting anything that doesn't go first to a U.S. citizen and a legal resident with a green card holder. I'm a firm believer in that. However, you have to go back to the practical point. How do you get rid of 10 or 12 million people? You can't, is the point I'm making. People want to say, oh, they just need to leave. Well, it ain't going to happen. If they spent their, especially if you're someone you're brought here as a child, you only speak English, you've never set a foot in your country that you can remember, and you want to dump them somewhere else. I think people that express those sentiments are not thinking of the big picture. They're just looking at the world around them. Well, we don't, they should just leave. Well, it's 10 or 12 million people. How do you do that? And the answer is you can't do it in any way that's not going to evoke images of Germany in the 1930s. And this is just being practical, from my experience, actually arresting people for crime. In the course of my career, I think I arrested about 500 people, but it took me years to do that and an awful lot of paperwork. And definitely got the right people, got an awful lot of convictions, but 10, 12 million people, it's not going to happen. Do we get them in line, get them to actually somehow find a way not to do what Reagan did in the 80s, where he granted amnesty with a wave of no, no, that screwed us over because it did set up the scenario like you're saying now, where these people are getting all these benefits in healthcare for free over in front of U.S. citizens. Heck, my brother-in-law has a hard time getting healthcare, and he's born and raised here in the United States in L.A. And but man, you can be illegal and you're in the ER and they're operating on you right away, and that's
Yeah,
bullshit.
it absolutely is. I appreciate the back and forth on this particular issue because I know it's very touchy for a lot of people, and rightfully so. I mean, it's one of the biggest issues of our day. We could talk about it for a very long time, but I did want to touch on a couple of things before we wrap up the interview, just because I have a couple other notes here. Um, you mentioned earlier the staffing issues and the hiring 2,000 deputies in 2 years. Other reports out there have said that cities like Lakewood and Malibu have actually turned to private security to handle nightly patrols and things like that. And you're saying 6 cities?
Cities have done that.
Okay. I just wanted to get your thoughts on how can we fix the lack of staffing and fix the confidence that these cities might have some shaken confidence in the LA County Sheriff's Department by, they turn to these private security companies, and how do we fix all that with the staffing issues with that?
Well, the number one way to fix the staffing issue is to get rid of Luna. He is the number one reason why the staffing crisis exists. I told you previously, in 2019, I hired 1,100 deputies in 1 year. I didn't have a marketing firm. I didn't have consultants. I didn't have support of the board of supervisors. I had nothing. All I had was the previous sheriff had already been allowed, green lighted to have X amount of academy classes during the course of the year. We filled them up. We filled them up to every class graduate with at least 85 deputy sheriffs in them, each class. Now they have a class in Whittier that started 2 months ago. They got 30 deputies. You can see when you're
It's a
when you
big drop.
graduate in class of 30, you're supposed to have 85, you're going to shrink real quick.
Yeah.
And the shrinking is going to continue nonstop until a lot of the cities are going to start forming their own police force. Lancaster now has a police department because the sheriffs could not fully staff Lancaster Station. It's a huge step backward. What you're saying about Lakewood and Malibu, Rosemead is doing it. West Hollywood is doing it. All kinds of the cities that are contracts with the sheriff's department are hiring private security to fill the void. And all of this is because Luna does not have the trust of the organization. Your employees are your number one recruiters. When they say, come on, join my workforce, come join my organization because I trust it, they'll do it. But when they tell you go anywhere but my employer because it really sucks here, that's the message that's going on right now.
Mm,
But you don't hear that in the press. You don't hear that the politicians admit that. It's
yeah.
the obvious thing. They can't admit it because they have to admit failure. They were quick to get rid of me, but they never quite understood why I was able to hire so many people because I had the trust of the organization. We fired people, we held people accountable. Heck, I even had some people prosecuted that needed to be. However, I did it based on facts, not on agendas, not to throw somebody under the bus for the sole purpose of looking good for some activist group, which is exactly what Luna did. When he got rid of Trevor Kirk, he lost the entire workforce right there. He was already losing it. It just confirmed it. When he got rid of John Gardner, same thing happened. He cannot recover from any of that.
Yeah, and speaking of recovery, that's with money and the budget. It appears as if the LA County Sheriff's Department is in a $168 million deficit under Luna. How do we fix the budget, Sheriff? How do we get that going? Because from what I understand, under your previous administration, you did a fairly decent job with the budget, and now it's in a complete and utter wreck, basically.
Well, you laugh at this. When I took over in 18, I had a deficit of 101 million. That was my starting point. By the time we left office, we left it with a $74 million surplus.
Hmm.
So we turned it around. We did is we shrunk the overhead massively. I got rid of an assistant sheriff, got rid of I think a division chief or two. I took 14 units, collapsed them into 7, got rid of all the overhead, cut overtime expenditures in half. So when we had to spend overtime on emergencies, we narrowed it down to just the bodies we needed and used them versus the old, they put everybody on 12-hour shifts and they sit in parking lots for days and do nothing. That just keeps the meter running like a taxi and doesn't accomplish anything. So we got all of that right sided. We also got a bunch of people back to work. They were off on, work related injuries, and they had no desire to come back to work because of McDonald. I got them back to work. Now, the same crowd is left because of Luna. They don't want to come back until Luna is gone. You have people that left early to retirement. They left money on the table because they had no desire to continue working under Luna. You
Hmm.
have a record number of deputies are transferring to other agencies.
Wow.
And all of this, press is quiet about it. Politicians are quiet about it because they cannot acknowledge they miscalculated and they failed miserably. We can change all that because our deputies already hit me up. Hey, if you come back, will you take me back? And I told them, oh, hell yes, I will. You're all welcome back. And we'll get people that retired early. You want to finish your career on your terms? Come on back. So we have the potential and we anticipate increased recruitment right off the bat. As soon as word's out that Luna is gone, floodgates are going to open.
I do hear about the low morale under the current administration for sure. A lot of people are definitely not happy.
16
Uh,
suicides on his watch.
yeah, that's really sad.
That's a national record of
Wow.
disgrace. No agency has ever experienced that in such a short time frame.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite the travesty. Um, one more question before we wrap it up today. You've mentioned before that, you've been able to clean up Venice, clean up Olvera Street, and clearly we have a pretty big homeless issue in LA County, and downtown LA doesn't look too pretty. There's a pretty big problem there. What do we do about homelessness? How do we clean up the streets, and what can you take from what you did in Venice and Olvera Street and apply that to what's going on currently?
Well, I can tell you this, I can size up or scale up what we did in Venice and Olvera Street and Larios Park, Parnell Park, San Vicente in front of the VA Center in Brentwood. All those success stories, we can scale them up to cover the entire county of LA. And I have targets in mind that I want to address. I want to address Hollywood. I want to address MacArthur Park. And the biggest of all, the grand prize, Skid Row. We can
Sure.
physically clean up Skid Row just like we did Venice and these other places. It's going to take more resources, it's going to take more time, but we have the formula that works. You think politicians will be beating down my door? Hey, how did you do that? Can you do it over here? No, their reaction when we cleaned up Venice was, how dare you? I mean, it's comical. The
Yeah.
local residents, they were ecstatic. Oh, they rolled out the red carpet for us, gave us the keys to the city. But you looked at the political establishment, is like we ran over their puppy in the driveway or something. And it turns out it was the homeless industrial complex that was benefiting from all the homeless. If we clean up the homeless, there's no more money to throw at these nonprofits. That's where the answer lies. That's where the problem lies. And that's where the answer lies.
They say, as the old axiom goes, create the problem and then you use yourself as the solution. But in this situation, you perpetuate the problem to
Yep.
then continue to see yourself as the solution. And I agree there with the homeless industrial complex completely just blindsiding people and, pulling on the heartstrings of people. Oh, we got to help people. And this is horrible. While all the while they're lining their coffers and they're exploiting this horrible situation. So yeah, we definitely need to really target that hard. And yeah, Skid Row is absolutely the prize of knocking that out. That'll really restore confidence in public safety and how the sheriff can handle that. Well, before we wrap up, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit down with me and talk about some very pressing issues
Mhm.
with the Second Amendment, immigration, homelessness, things like that. And before we wrap up the video, is there anything that you'd like to say to the voters out there? And, here's your little elevator pitch, I guess you could say, right? What sets you apart, and what other things would you like to say to the voters?
Well, the choice we're facing in November of this year is real simple. Are you safer today than you were in 2022? If you can't answer that question truthfully, well, then I'm your man. Simple as that. Crime is up, homelessness is up, arrests are down, and the man in office right now is responsible for all three. We can definitely change the trajectory, but we got to go back to what we were doing that works. And that's getting a fully staffed sheriff's department, working hand in hand with the community, and we can make that happen.
All righty. Well, thank you again, Sheriff Villanueva, for joining us. And thank you, everybody at home, for watching this interview. Feel free to let us know what you thought of everything we talked about today. And make sure you check out all the links that we will have in the description if you guys want to stay up to date with everything that the San Fernando Valley chapter of the California Rifle and Pistol Association is up to. Thank you again for watching, everyone, and may God bless America.